You're listening to Seattle Real Estate Podcast.
Disturbing allegations emerge about nonprofit hired to end Bitter Lake Encampment in Seattle. So the Bitter Lake Encampment, that was the one that was on Seattle Public Schools property. So it's kind of wedged in between a school and Bitter Lake. And Bitter Lake it's a small body of water. It's not huge, but it's there. And so we've had this deal where you've got this school, we've got kids going back to school, and yet you've got this homeless encampment on school property. And the Seattle public school system basically saying, no, we're not sweeping the camp. We're not doing that. Well, it got so bad when the kids actually started going back to in-class schooling. Doesn't it feel like we're in class? Oh, we're remote. Oh, we're in class. Oh, we're remote. I mean, we're just getting jerked around, right? By, just all kinds of stuff. It's one of those time periods where just, with COVID, it's just insane. And so we had a sweep happen at Bitter Lake, basically got everybody out of there. But one of the storylines, and this has been kicking around for probably 6 weeks now, is that there was a nonprofit organization that the Seattle Public Schools tasked to clear out this camp, and some really nasty allegations came out of it. And that's what we're going to talk about today. And more so, not about the allegations, but the accountability part of it. Like, what is going to prevent this from happening again down the road so that homeless people have a hard enough time, right? I mean, you say what you want, whether they're there by choice or not there by choice. But if they're actively trying to get into housing, if they're trying to get things, we'll just give them a break. If they're trying to get their life together and they've got stuff going on like what we're going to read about here very shortly, those are not complications that they need to be dealing with. And yet here we are. And it doesn't look like there's going to be an investigation, and there's certainly not going to be any accountability. We'll talk about that too. All right, let's jump on in. Before we do, if you're new here, welcome. My name is Sean Reynolds. I own a couple of real estate companies, and I read the news. That's just what we're doing. As simple as that, right? And actually, I need to give credit. So I did an interview on, I think, December 9th. With Andrea Suarez, and she runs We Heart Seattle, and she goes around and picks up garbage for free. Doesn't expect payment for it. Just talked about her a lot, talked about her organization a lot. I think she does a lot of really good things, and did an interview with her at the beginning of actually first week of December, and we talked about this very issue. And she had contact with Mike Matthias, and he's the individual that's being accused of doing some of this stuff. And so I've got a little bit of insight from there, but I didn't really want to cover this story because I just didn't have quite enough details. Jason Rance had covered this story, and I thought he did a great job. And some of the stuff that he was talking about, I'm like, oh yeah, that's not good. That's not good. So now we're going to get into it. Seattle Times released an article today. Andrea Suarez sent that to me via text this morning. It's what we're doing. So when the volunteer-run organization Anything Helps, headed by a man who said he could do homeless encampment outreach better, when he approached the Seattle Public Schools this summer and offered to end an encampment outside Broadview-Thompson K-12, the school district agreed. And a lot of folks were like, in the whole homeless deal, people that are helping outreach, mutual aid, let's call it that. People that are in that system are like, who is Anything Helps? We don't know anything about them. What's the dealio here? The district, Seattle School District, was under pressure from people in the surrounding Bitter Lake neighborhood to remove the 60-plus person encampment, and had argued with the city of Seattle for much of the past year about whose responsibility it was and how it should be done. City of Seattle said, hey, this is public school property. This is not a City of Seattle issue. This is public school property. And the school system said, we're not doing sweeps. We don't believe in sweeps. We're not doing them. So there was this standoff going on for a long time. And in the meantime, parents of kids, elementary school kids, young elementary school kids, are watching, weapons being brought in, naked guys ODing, prostitution, stolen goods being sold out of the encampment, just the standard run-of-the-mill stuff that you've got in so many of these encampments, especially when they get to like 60-plus person. That's a community, right? And oftentimes, you've got stuff going on in there that, probably isn't appropriate for elementary-aged children to be viewing and experiencing. I've done multiple podcasts on that, and this encampment in particular, because it was like, you're a school district. Shouldn't you be looking out for the welfare of the kids? That's kind of what I was thinking, but anywho, details, right? So the school district didn't devote much money to the effort of clearing the encampment, and the offer from Anything Helps was appealing because of its price tag. Sometimes you get what you pay for, right? I mean, that's basic business. All right, if it's super cheap, there's a reason behind it. Let's check into it. Let's take a little looky-see. School district didn't do that. So the school district thought it would only be paying the cost associated with getting people inside. The group's leader, Matthias, who used to be homeless himself, and his volunteer team were all unpaid. The district ultimately reimbursed him for more than $20,000 for those costs. Now, I think he was given $20,000 up front, and then he was taking out those expenses. And that $20,000, he's accused of using some of that money to score drugs. So those are kind of some of the storylines. Whether that's true or not, I don't know. And in the multiple stories I've read on this, it's kind of unclear. But you can see how that would be an issue. No, I didn't use any of that money, and here's receipts. And it's kind of like, okay, who do you trust? Who do you believe? The district did not run a background check or confirm Matthias' employment history, according to a spokesperson for the Seattle Public Schools. Interesting. You're going to be responsible for clearing out an encampment, and nobody's going to do any kind of check, or are you licensed, or what is your resume for getting this done? But here in Seattle, it's not really required that you be competent at what you're going to be tasked and paid for to do. You just get the job kind of by being in the right place at the right time and maybe knowing somebody, and then here we go, and now we're reading a news story, right? Neither did the King County Regional Homeless Authority. They didn't do a background check, which began working with Matthias on getting housing vouchers to more than a dozen of the homeless people. I actually believe from Andrea Suarez, I think we talked about that he had 14 housing vouchers, and those are really sought after, because if you are a nonprofit and you've got housing vouchers, that means that you can actually get people into housing. So these housing vouchers, they're really hard to get. And he was just given 14 kind of point blank, and people were like, wait a minute, we haven't heard of you. You got 14 housing vouchers. How did this happen? Yeah, it did, right? So if these agencies had done a background check, they might have reconsidered putting Matthias and Anything Helps in charge. Now, let's be honest. Anything Helps basically is Mike Matthias, right? It's kind of like when you see real estate groups and there's one main person. It's group of one. I mean, you use the word group, or you use a corporation because you have to incorporate, and especially for something like this, nonprofit. But he's a one-man show. He's got some volunteers, but they were not full-time staff. And at one point in time, I think he claimed that he had 5 full-time staff members, something like that. There's a lot of details that it's kind of unknown, and you can kind of see why we ended up where we did. So it was a young agency, very new, like a year or less, a young agency run entirely by volunteers and headed by someone who was the subject of protection orders filed by 2 women who alleged stalking and harassment. The school district also didn't run a competitive process to pick the agency it worked with or provide much, if any, oversight to Matthias. So he came in with a lowball offer. School district say, yeah, we'll take it. Here's $20,000. You go do your thing. That to me there's a real problem there. And if we don't identify that issue right there, we're not going to. This is Seattle, and this is, politics, and this is what we're doing. And The housing, the unhoused it's such a major issue. And yet you've got stuff like this going on, and you're kind of scratching your head going, all right, so we're identifying this, pretty major news story. We're identifying this. Are we going to do anything moving forward so that we make sure this doesn't happen again? It doesn't really seem that way. We're going to talk about that in a second. So district officials declined to answer questions about whether Matthias' background would have affected their decision to work with Anything Helps or what their responsibility was during the encampment removal. Well, we've hired other people. City of Seattle's hired other people with questionable backgrounds to do, stuff like reducing gun violence, and we've got former felons doing that kind of thing. I mean, it's not uncommon, to have people from the community, from those communities, come back and serve. All right. But there's got to be a vetting process. Right? Doesn't appear like there was anything on this one. It was like, all right, you're cheap. You're on. You're our new guy. Now at Bitter Lake, two people who used to live in the encampment who spoke to the Seattle Times alleged that at the same time Matthias was helping people move toward housing, he was also pressuring them to help him buy meth. Not good. Using nonprofit funds that came from the school district or community donations. And also he was trying to get them to help him inject it. Matthias has denied the allegations of misusing money and getting high, but he said he did some things he regrets because of the immense pressure he was under. All right. But you're the one who said, hey, you can get this done very cheaply. So you created that pressure. I mean, am I wrong here? It's not like anybody put you under that pressure. That is one of those deals where I'm under so much pressure. All right. But did you, put yourself in that position? It's pretty clear that you did. So you got pressure. All right. We've all got pressure to do stuff. But the bottom line is, I think maybe the pressure in this situation for this individual was probably more than was appropriate. That's the bottom line. The events at Bitter Lake raised questions about resources. If more public money had been devoted to the effort by the school district or Seattle government, would a larger organization with more internal checks and balances have been hired instead? Probably. I mean, I would hope so. Because as we're going to find out when we do a little bit more of a deep dive on Mike Matthias, there's some other issues going on as well. Allison Eisinger, the director of the Seattle-King County Coalition on Homelessness, blamed former Seattle Mayor Jenny Durkin rather than the authority or the school district for what happened. While this is terrible, the real question should be, why was Seattle Public Schools left to figure this out without actual professional, contracted, experienced staff? Eisinger said. From what I understand, the reason is it wasn't on Seattle city property. It was on Seattle Public Schools property, and they basically told the city to stand down. So that's why. And everybody knows the Seattle Public School System is not in the business of moving, homeless, unhoused folks into housing. That's not their thing. They're there to educate kids. Right? I mean, that is the end goal of a public school system, right? Okay, we can agree on that. And so the public school system said, hey, we don't want to move them out. And so it's not City of Seattle property. What's the City of Seattle supposed to do? And Mayor Durkin, I think, was pretty clear on that line. And when I read that, I was like, okay. Spokespeople for Durkin didn't respond to questions. She's no longer the mayor. She stepped down. All of this is happening at a time where we've got, new incoming mayor, new incoming city attorney. We got new council members. We're in a flux position. But in the meantime, you've got unhoused people that are living in sleet and snow and just a mess. And then you've got, nonprofit agencies with their leader that doing stuff like this. And it's like, this isn't good. The school district has ended its agreement with Anything Helps, and the Homelessness Authority has handed off the 14 housing vouchers set aside for the nonprofit to a larger outreach organization. The Bitter Lake Encampment is one of the most controversial of the last year. And we've talked about this. Nestled on the shore of the lake between a school playground and a playfield Where kids' sports resumed in 2021, some neighbors and parents pressured the city and school district to remove it. I mean, that's a no-brainer. Kids have a hard enough time going to school and not going to school and being at home and, isolating and all this other crazy stuff. Kids don't necessarily do that because, the whole Rona and kids thing, but their parents certainly have. And with parents being home, this is a tough time for everybody. And throw that on top. You've got a homeless encampment next to the school with just stuff going on that shouldn't be. And the parents are right. I totally side with the parents. Get that encampment out of there. Clear that encampment out. Priority number one. Because you got kids there, right? You had somebody from the encampment go into the school, try and steal a backpack. I mean, just the stories just go on and on and on, right? Others pushed for the city to allow the people there to stay and to provide hygiene facilities so that they wouldn't need to wash in the lake, potentially hazardous to everyone. What kind of insanity is that? No, don't move them out. Let's bring in a temporary shower so that they don't have to use the lake. Really? Okay. Even after the camp removal, a group of neighbors and parents of Broadview-Thompson students filed a lawsuit in December against Seattle Public Schools over the camp. But the school board and district leadership had committed to not remove campers without a place for them to go. Well, other encampments have been cleared out. Miller Park in Seattle, the former Chop Park in Capitol Hill, those have been cleared out. People have gone somewhere. So, I know it's a hard thing to get housing for these folks, but other encampments have been cleared out. And that's kind of my point is that, right, your top priority should be children, especially elementary. I mean, just super young. It's like, okay, yeah. No, what could possibly go wrong? Homeless encampment, school? It's fine. It's Seattle. It's what we're doing. A mission Matthias said he shared, which is they wanted a place for the campers to go without moving them before he moved them. Matthias had watched previous cleanups and wanted to help pioneer a more compassionate way of ending encampments, he said. We just saw an opportunity to do something different at Bitter Lake, Matthias said. No other nonprofits were offering to do this work, certainly not for so little money, the school district said. You get what you pay for. There's a reason, because you need way more resources than a team of volunteers and maybe 20 grand to get this going, reimbursed 20 grand. So district officials, the Seattle Public School district officials, they didn't specify any oversight that they provided, and they didn't check into Matthias' background or experience, or experience specifically. Do you have any experience to do this job? This is an issue that has the public's eyeballs on it because you've got a school, you've got kids, you've got parents, you've got concerned community members all looking at this deal, and Seattle Public Schools are like, you're cheap. All right, you're hired. Let's go. Let's do this. A spokesperson for the Regional Homeless Authority said in an email that the agency did verify the organization's nonprofit status and that Anything Helps had a relationship with Seattle Public Schools. All right, let's talk about that. Verifying the organization's nonprofit status. That means you just kind of look up and see if they've got the old 501c. Are they registered with the state of Washington? Yes, they are. So somebody sits down, does a quick search, they come up with that. That is what that means. Nothing more. And Anything Else Helps had and they put in quotes in this article, relationship with Seattle Public Schools. What does that mean? Who knows? But whatever it wasn't a very deep relationship, because if it was, I think Seattle Public Schools would have understood, maybe this is a little bit more than this individual and this quote unquote group, Anything Helps, can actually provide services for. This is above and beyond their pay grade. That's bottom line, right? But the brand new nonprofit was essentially just Matthias, who'd created Anything Helps last spring, according to Anything Helps board director Mark Garrett. Garrett said he met Matthias in April 2021 when the two were helping homeless people displaced by encampment removals. They shared a desire to change the way encampment removals happen, so Garrett signed on as a board president. I think they're coming from the right the right headspace, the right heart space. I think they wanted to do something differently. And from that standpoint, I'm going to throw them a bone and say, all right, so you wanted to do something that helps out the homeless people. But unfortunately, trying to do it that way and with as little resources as you basically had an unfunded startup step in to a super high profile, hot, sticky situation. And it's not surprising that the whole deal has just gone sideways, right? I mean, it's just not. So in business terms, if this happened, heads would roll. But because this is Seattle Public Schools and the city of Seattle and some homeless people and, a new agency, just not, we're going to read a few stories and that's going to be it. And in like the Jason Rantz article that I read, he was like, the fact that we're not going to do any real investigation into this so far that we know of basically ensures that this is going to happen again. And that's the negative. That's the big downside. It's like, okay, that's not good. That's not good. We need to figure out a way around that so this doesn't happen again. Garrett said the board members essentially worked as advisors to Matthias. It's a nonprofit created by Mike. It's really Mike's entity, Garrett said. If Mike stopped working in this area, then anything helps would fold. All right. So it was, a small company, a small nonprofit, basically just Mike doing his thing. Unfortunately, a past unchecked. That's our next section here. Matthias' employment history is difficult to verify. That's not good. And court records show past allegations of intimidating women. Seattle school officials did not comment on whether these issues would have concerned them or whether Matthias should have been in a position of power without formal oversight. There was no oversight to this whatsoever. There wasn't a single entity that was tasked with, okay, so here's what you've said you're going to do. These are the goals of this project. Here's the money. Here's the budget. Here's how we're going to get there. Didn't have any of that, right? Didn't have any of that. Matthias's LinkedIn profile says that he worked for the city of Issaquah for 4 months last year, but a city spokesperson said that he worked for a local food bank under a city contract for just 2 months. In a phone call, Matthias acknowledged that he didn't work for the city directly. All right, but he put that on his LinkedIn because it looks better. But said that it was 3 months. So is it 4, 3, or 2? It's unclear. We don't really know. Does it really matter? No. But the fact that we've got so many little bits and pieces of information here that don't add up, that's the big picture. That's the big story, right? It's like, oh, yeah, there's a lot of things in this storyline that just went sideways. And it's not shocking that we ended up where we did, which is his 14 housing vouchers got pulled and he's off the task and somebody else came in and took over his job. And, but how about the folks that he impacted, people in the encampment? Yeah, we're gonna talk about that here in a second. So we've got the 4, 3, 2, 1 liftoff. No, I'm kidding. It's more of we don't really know how many months he worked there. All right. He also lists stints at Pioneer Human Services and the National Alliance on Mental Illness Eastside chapter, but neither could confirm or deny he worked there. Right? Okay. The 2 women who said that they were in fear of him filed for protection orders against Matthias in 2017. All right. They stem from an incident in which he broke into staff workspaces at a North Seattle substance use and mental health clinic where he was receiving treatment, and he yelled at employees, chased or lunged at his therapist, and threatened to beat up his psychiatrist, according to 12 statements from employees. This is the guy tasked with getting homeless people, 60 plus homeless people, out of an encampment. Does that sound like a stable individual who should be doing said work? I don't think so. However, here we are. Staff members felt extraordinarily unsafe and are concerned that his mental health issues, continued substance abuse, His calculating and premeditated behaviors, the clinic manager wrote, could result in continued contact, threats, and dangerous behaviors, especially if he feels triggered. That year and the next year, Matthias was also charged with malicious mischief and fourth-degree assault in Bellevue and Redmond, but he completed community service and anger management training, and the charges were dismissed. Not shocking, right? He took a plea. Matthias said that those who were issues in his past and that they were exaggerated, but he'd also grown from them and produced a letter from a therapist he met with afterward that said that he was not a threat. You pay somebody to write something, they're going to write it, right? I mean, somebody's going to stick their name to that. Weeks ago, an unknown number of Anything Help volunteers sent an email outlining disturbing allegations about Matthias to a slew of homelessness policymakers. This is Volunteers with Anything Helps, his own organization. The volunteers said that Matthias had abused his position as the person with the power to get encampment residents inside and used illegal drugs on the clock. This story just keeps getting worse, right? And that's the major story, is that while he's trying to help folks get into housing, he's also having them buy drugs and helping him shoot up. When the email became public, Matthias denied most of the allegations, but said that he did ask a person in an encampment to help him use drugs once. Okay, so he basically admits it. He doesn't admit the full scope, and we don't really know what that looks like. But the folks that he tried to help him get, score and use drugs, they said it happened more than just once. The Seattle Times spoke to many people living in the encampment on and off the record. Some defended Matthias and praised his work getting them into housing. He did do some good work, it appears. But that's overshadowed and, clouded by the other stuff going on, because that far outweighs getting people into housing, right? The fact that you're putting in jeopardy people who need the help the most, and you're exposing them to just, further stuff that they shouldn't be exposed to from a nonprofit organizer. But Adriana Krieger, who came to Bitter Lake in July, said that Matthias invited her to his place this summer to let her shower. Before she went into the bathroom, she said, he asked her to help him find a vein so that he could inject meth. Krieger made a joke. If she screwed up, would her housing be in jeopardy? Matthias assured her no. Krieger tried several times, was unsuccessful, and Matthias changed his mind, she said. Matthias said that he didn't invite Krieger back to his apartment. After a few unsuccessful attempts in his car, he said he stopped before he got high. Matthias said he regretted his decision and hasn't used any drugs or asked any campers for help using them since. But Krieger said that she helped him successfully inject 5 or 6 times after that. Sherry S., who asked that her last name not be published because her story involves her own drug use, said that she helped Matthias use 4 or 5 times this fall as well, and that she saw him use the nonprofit's company card to get cash that he then gave her so that she could buy meth for the two of them. All right. So you're getting the picture now, right? I mean, you're kind of understanding, all right, we've got a he said, she said, but unfortunately the she said is by multiple she's. And it kind of paints a picture that Mike Matthias is basically minimizing. So he said that he was helping me out, Sherry said. I'll help you get yours today if you can help me shoot up. Not good. Matthias denied these allegations as well. So public records obtained by the Seattle Times showed that instead of including receipts, invoices from Anything Helps simply listed services the group said it provided, such as moving expenses and cleaning fees. And amounts. So they're basically just making up their expense accounts. The school district has asked for all receipts related to the work, and Matthias is providing them, he said. Okay. Matthias believes this is a coordinated defamation campaign resulting from a falling out with a former Anything Helps volunteer. All right. Why would you have a falling out with your volunteer and then they're going to throw you under the bus with some super serious allegations that are corroborated between multiple people, basically telling the same story? But anywho, we're just going to keep reading, right? So he says that since the email outlining accusations was sent and recovered in local media, he's been harassed at home, at encampment removals where he's tried to help, and even physically attacked. Matthias shared pictures of his face with stitches. I feel like I'm a martyr in all this, Matthias said. He pointed out that he is formerly homeless and received financial assistance from the state while he was doing outreach. All right. So the state very easily could have run his name through the system, figured out that he's getting assistance, and then maybe dug a little deeper into the fact of, is this guy qualified? Is this guy financially stable enough where he can do all this and not be homeless himself? It doesn't appear that there were any checks done. There were no checks done. People with experience being homeless and navigating the behavioral health system make the best outreach staff, according to Derek Bellegarde, executive director of the Chief Seattle Club, which works with Indigenous people who are homeless. Okay, that might be true, but there's probably a long period in which they work at becoming unhoused and maybe not dependent on drugs, maybe working through whatever psychological, emotional issues they've got going on, because it appears that Mike Matthias, he had some of those issues that may or may not have been resolved by the time that we get into all of this. So you might be able to say, hiring former homeless, that's okay. But there's got to be some checks and oversight to make sure that those formerly homeless people aren't, 1 foot, in a tent and 1 foot trying to help those in tents. There's got to be some more accountability here. They're more accepted into the community or into the encampment, Bellegarde said, but those people need to be vetted and supported when they're going back to situations like the ones they've been in the past. If an outreach worker or case manager started using drugs and it was affecting the person's work, Bellegarde said, Chief Seattle Club would work with that person to perhaps take leave and get into treatment. But if they were caught even trying to do drugs with people they're supposed to be helping, it's a fired on the spot offense. I mean, that to me is that's exactly correct. And then also there's got to be, for this situation where you've given 20 grand of taxpayers' money to this individual, there's got to be some accountability. There's just got to be. But it's Seattle. It's what we're doing, right? We've got to make sure that we're ready, because the last thing we want to do is re-traumatize people or put them into a situation where they're triggered, Bellegarde said. The email with allegations, which wasn't signed by individuals, just the Anything Helps team, caused the Homelessness Authority to temporarily suspend housing vouchers to Matthias that he'd been working to get for people at Bitter Lake. But no one appears to take responsibility for investigating whether wrongdoing happened. That's the part that, on top of the fact that it happened in the first place, I'm kind of looking at this story going, how did we get here? That is horrific. The Homelessness Authority said an investigation was under the school district's purview, and the school district said it's up to Anything Helps. No. If you hired them, it's not up to the company that you hired. It's a one-man show. It's one dude. I mean, you got to recognize that. Anything Helps. I mean, the guy doing this stuff isn't going to do the investigation. How hard is that to figure out? But because Anything Helps leadership is basically just Matthias, the nonprofit won't be investigating. Some of this stuff, it just makes you go, right? Nah, it makes me go, what the F? Seriously. Matthias stepped down from Anything Helps after the allegations emerged so that the housing vouchers from the Regional Homeless Authority wouldn't be endangered, he said. Board member Garrett is now the acting director. To set me up to the degree of which there would be this expectation that I would be this put-together formal leader in this space is not what I was ever trying to do, Matthias said. I was just trying to build a parallel structure. I was trying to do something different. And that would have all been fine had you not used some of that money to score drugs and to help people that you're trying to get off the streets, out of the encampment, into housing. If that whole part wouldn't have happened, I don't think there would be an issue. We wouldn't have an issue. You'd be doing the thing that you committed to the city of Seattle and to Seattle Public Schools. You'd be doing what you said you were going to do, but that's not the case. We went down a little bit of a different rabbit hole, and that rabbit hole exploded into this. And now I'm reading about it in the Seattle Real Estate Podcast, right? So yeah, those are the broad strokes of, the most recent just debacle that we've got going with homelessness and the unhoused here in Seattle. And this is kind of a classic example of you've got the blind leading the blind. And then even when it's all said and done, where everybody's like, all right, that shouldn't have happened, there's no accountability. And I think Jason Rance is right. This is going to happen again because you've got nothing to prevent it from happening down the road, say in a couple of years, and maybe it doesn't happen just like this, but something along the lines of homeless people are going to be taken advantage of again. The city, taxpayers, you and I are going to be taken advantage again because our 20 grand is sitting there, with expenses for who knows what, because it doesn't appear there are any receipts, but we're working on them. But we're working on a lot of things in this case, right? That may or may not come to fruition. Don't know. But yeah, this is a wild storyline, and I kind of passed on it until I saw this Seattle Times article forwarded from Andrea Suarez, and at that point in time, I thought, okay, yeah, that's enough people that have talked about this storyline, have indicated, sources, enough folks, because I don't really like to do stories that I can't vet at least a few times within the media. And not saying media is perfect, obviously not. It's wildly inaccurate. And that's why I kind of hold off on maybe reading these stories. But when I saw this one, I was like, okay, yep, I gotta record that bad boy. Because it needs more attention to the fact that you've got some accountability issues from a public standpoint trying to handle this issue, which is an enormous issue. The unhoused in not only Seattle, but across the United States in cities with leadership similar to Seattle and, say, Portland and, LA, and the list goes on, right? All right. That's it for me on this one. This topic, I don't think much else is going to come from this. I think this is kind of over and out, but if there is anything left after this podcast, you need to return right to the Seattle Real Estate Podcast and get a little checkup, because I'll bring it to you, whatever it is, good, bad, or indifferent. All right. Thanks so much for being here. Thanks so much for being part of the Seattle Real Estate Podcast. I will catch up with you soon. Until then, stay safe and we'll talk again. Bye for now.